Okay, so today we are going to talk about an error, and that's the located assemblies manifest definition does not match the assembly reference. So this is kind of a common error that has been happening for quite some time, but I really thought that we should talk about it today and we see all the possible solutions, and probably if any references we can also just work on them and talk about them and see how we can solve this error. So it's really a common error. First of all, we are going to approach it in a different way. First of all, we're going to talk about its what is it in the first place, then its origin, its cause, what causes it mainly, and then how to solve it, and how different people have solved it over time, over the internet, how people have approached it, and how it has really affected them differently in different IDEs. You know, a lot of people use different IDEs, so you never know how the error comes differently, and so many people work on different projects, so probably they could be getting the same error but in different ways. So we need to exploit all that, and then finally we shall have an expert opinion about the error and how to solve it generally. Hopefully by the end of the this video you'll be have gotten or have gotten some kind of solution, at least to apply to your own IDE or to your own coding, or how to use and solve the same error in your condition. So let's start off. Now this is the condition. This is how it manifested. The located assemblies manifest definition does not match the assembly reference. Moving on, we can see the error details. Most people get such a screen where I have system.io file load exception, could not load file, or assembly utility version blah blah blah, and stuff like that. And finally they say the located assembly manifest definition does not match the assembly reference, and an exception from that. Now you can see it couldn't load and brings the same error here. So this is one of the scenarios where we receive the same error in this format. So let's move on and see how it manifests. And this is another formation where it manifests. Could not load file or assembly system.web.optimized version blah blah. Then they said the located assemblies manifest definition does not match the assembly reference. Same error exception 0 0 times 80, 13, 10, and 40. And therefore you can see description and an unhandled exception occurred during the execution of the current web request. Please review the stack trace for more information. So same error happening. So let's go to the error details, where we have it's actually typically found where there is a mismatch between the version of an assembly that is referred by your project and the version that is actually loaded at runtime. So the project has a version of the assembly that it refers to, but then you find that at runtime you have another version that actually is being referred at runtime. So now these are two versions, and there is a mismatch. These two versions are not the same, so that's why you happen to get that error. Otherwise you should be having the same versions of the assembly at runtime being referred to by the same project, and also at runtime the same version of the assembly should be. But when you have that mismatch, that discrepancy between the two versions of the assembly being referred to by the project and then by the actual version actually at runtime, then you happen to get that error. And the most common cause of this error is when you have multiple versions of the same assembly installed on the same machine, um, and your project is probably referencing to different versions. And of course that's how I just have explained. It's the project referencing to a different version of assembly, and then I also refer when you're running at runtime, you're referring to a very different version of the assembly, so that's when you get the error. So moving on, we are yet to see more causes But let's exploit more of the other causes of the error. So the assembly, number one, you might have other causes that are a little bit different from the first one that we explained. Number one, we have the assembly version referred in the project is incorrect or does not match the version of the assembly that is available. So this is slightly a different case, but more similar to the one that you've looked at previously. And this can happen if the assembly has been previously been updated or replaced with a different version. Okay, two, in another case, we might see that the assembly is marked as a copy local false. And in this project is properties, which means that the assembly is not being copied to the output directory when the project is built. And this can cause the issue with the assembly loading time, of course. So you have to make sure that you have the same versions of running time and then the project assembly that is being referred to. Three, the assembly probably was built with a different version of the .NET framework than the one that is actually being used by the project. So for example, if you have the projects being built by the .NET framework 4.5 and the assembly was built using the .NET framework 4.4, so you find that the assembly, two different versions of the assembly are being built by two different versions of .NET framework. One was built by 4.5 and another one was built by 4.0. So these are two different frameworks building two different versions of the assembly, and you find that at runtime you're referencing to two different versions of assembly, and therefore you have the incompatibility issue, and then it comes in the incompatibility, the mismatch, and this is how the error comes in finally. Or the assembly was built with a different process architecture than the one that you're using with your project. For example, if your project was built with a 68 a times 66, which is a 32-bit, and the assembly was built a times 64, which is a 64-bit, this could cause a runtime error. People who are using Windows, you might have used the 32-bit system-based system architecture processor to build your assembly, and now you're running the project on a 64 system. So that's where you still have the mismatch of the two versions of assembly not being the same. Okay, now enough of that. Let's now exploit some solutions from online, from our community, people that have reached out and they are trying to talk to see how they have tried to solve this. Number one, possible solution. Now this guy is saying that the error is quite old, so probably ran into the same error and had the solutions which many projects for my own packages I had by accident added version tag in the CSP project files like this. Then I unpacked the NuGet packages for all these projects using the Yummy with the so looking at this, then finally it says the problem was that the version in the CS proj files didn't match the version in the environment variable GitHub version.cm. Now finally you come back to the same error, having a mismatch between two versions of the assembly, one probably built by a different base system or processor. For example, it might be like we've seen previously, you use the base 64, I mean a times 64 processor system, and now the project is working on a 32 base system. So you find that you have that mismatch between the assemblies, and finally you will have this error coming in. So after removing all, he says this is how he solved it. After removing all the version 1.00 tags, he removed the tags from the CS proj file assembly, automatically assigned the environment variables with both NuGet would have the same version, and the same problem was solved. So after removing this version, the problem was resolved automatically. Let's look at another possible solution by another person. In my case, the problem was between the chair and the keyboard. Two or more different assemblies wanted to use a different version of the .NET, exactly what we've been seeing in the library, and that would not be a problem. Furthermore, on my local computer, web.config was automatically updated by the NuGet. Now then I realized that I had forgot to copy and deploy a new web.config to the production server. So if you had manually probably way of developing the web.config, check it is updated, and if you had completely different webhook for production server, you have to merge these dependent assembly sections in the sync after using the nootkit. Now this is how we solved his. And finally we have this one who says I got the same error. In my case I got resolved as follows. At first, when the application was installed, then the people here had used Microsoft Enterprise Library 4.1, the application the previous week. My machine was formatted, and after that today when we built the application, then it gave me an error that Enterprise Library Assembly is missing. When I installed Microsoft Enterprise Library 5.0, when I got on Google as first search entry, then I built the application, then it gave me the above error, located assembly manifest definition does not match the assembly reference. So after much of the search, work and analysis, finally found out that the application was referring to 4.0 and the DLL in the bin folder was the version 4 5.0. Just like we said, you might have a mismatch in the versions of the frameworks that build the assembly. And if the versions of the framework built assembly are very different, probably they're going to be building two different assemblies, of course, different version of assemblies, and that will cause a mismatch. So what I did was, when I installed the Microsoft Library 4.0, I removed the previous version and added a 4.0 reference, built the application, and rah, it worked. Let's look at another person. I had the same error, but in my case, I was running a custom NuGet package locally into another project. So what fixed this for me was changing the package version to the version requested in the error. So he followed the error. What the package was being requested is what he provided for. And finally, he solved the error in that way. We are looking at the possible solutions from our community. Finally, we shall be looking at the final solution from probably an expert, an opinion from an expert, see how generally how this error is handled. Had similar issue mentioned in this post. Any suggestions on how blah 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 needed this one needed help or prayer say. Now after a long series of our online community, how they are really looking at the solutions, how people manage to probably solve the same, you might be getting a clear image of that the general overview of the general approach is actually about the mismatch of the assemblies of first of all the project you're running, and then the other one is the assembly at runtime. So the ultimate solution from the expert, probably his opinion, is check the assembly reference in your project and ensure that it is correct and matches the version of the assembly that you want to use. Same interpretation. Ensure that the reference assembly is available in the global assembly cache, the GAC, or in the same directory as your project. You must make sure that this step 2 is done. Check that any dependent assemblies, that's step 3, are also correctly referred as available. Step 4, try cleaning and rebuilding your solution to ensure that all the necessary assemblies are being referred and built correctly. Step 5, you are still experiencing the same issue. You may need to use the tools such as Fuslog, now this one.exe, to help diagnose the issue. This tool can help you identify which assembly is being loaded at the time and which assembly is being used. So if you are having a problem in differentiating the two versions of assemblies that you're using, the one that is being loaded at runtime and the one that your project is using, you might use this tool, fuslog.vw.exe. These are online tools. You can try to download it and then install it on your computer. It will help you differentiate the two versions that you're using, and you can be able to choose one and finally solve the error. Let's look at the next solution from our expert. Finally, it is important to note that the specific steps required to solve this error may vary depending on the specifics of your project and environment. However, these above solutions are general and they should be solving your error at last. Solution 1 from the expert is check your assembly reference in your project should open. Of course, this is how they do the solution 1. If they tell you to check the assembly reference in your project, so you should open your project in Visual Studio, expand the references, find the assembly that is using the error, right click on it, and select properties from the context menu. So in the properties window, verify that the version property matches the version of the assembly that you want. So you have to check here in the property window and you verify the version property matches the version of assembly that you want to use. And if the version does not match, you can either update the reference to the correct version or update the assembly being used to match the version in the reference. So that was explaining solution number one from there. I expand this solution number one here. So now we're going to explain solution number two. To ensure that the reference assembly is available in the global assembly cache, that's the GAG that we talked about in the previous, which was solution number two in the same directory as your project, you can try the following. Number one, check if the necessary, if the assembly is already installed in the GAG. You can do this by opening the developer's command line and you type this. This is a command that you can type in the command line and replace the assembly. Make sure you replace the assembly with the name of the assembly that you are trying to reference. If the assembly is listed, it is already installed in the GAC. If it is not listed, you know it's not installed. And if it's not installed in the GAC, you can try copying it to the same directory as your project. You can do this by finding the DLL file for the assembly and copying it to the same directory as your project executing the file. Alternatively, you can add the directory containing the file to the project's reference path in Visual Studio. Make sure you take a screenshot of this and try to read even more details about this expert option. I'm sure if you expound on this and try to do exactly what the expert is telling you, you will be done in within no time. You have solved the error. So solution number two, to check any dependency assemblies are correctly referred to available. Open your project Visual Studio, expand the references in the folder in Solution Explorer window, look for independent assembly that are required by the assembly that is causing the error. These are usually listed in under the dependencies or the required dependencies section of the assemblies properties window. And make sure that you verify that the dependencies assemblies are correctly referred and available. You can do this by doing the following. We've already done that. You open the Visual Studio, select the build from the menu bar, and then click Clean Solution. This will remove any previous build files from the build. After the solution has been cleaned, select the build from the menu bar and then click Rebuild Solution. Okay, now that's all from our expert, and that's all we had today for this solution. Probably after passing through all these, you will be able to solve this error once and for all. Thank you for watching.